There is something about silence that makes people uncomfortable. Not the peaceful kind of silence, not the calm of an early morning before the world wakes up, but the heavy silence, the one that arrives when you've been working, striving, pushing with everything you have, and nothing seems to answer back. No signs, no applause, no visible shift, just effort disappearing into what feels like an empty space. That kind of silence can play tricks on the mind because when there is no feedback, the imagination fills the gap. You begin to wonder if you've been ignored, if your work has gone unnoticed, if your hopes have somehow missed their destination. The human mind is wired to seek evidence, to look for proof that movement is happening, that energy is producing results. And when that proof doesn't show up, doubt steps forward like it owns the place. You start asking questions you never used to ask. Is this worth it? Am I wasting my time? Maybe this just isn't meant for me. Notice how silence doesn't speak, yet somehow it amplifies every insecure thought you've ever had. It doesn't tell you to quit, but it creates the perfect environment for quitting to feel reasonable. It makes hesitation feel logical. It makes surrender feel justified, not because anything has actually gone wrong, but because you cannot see anything going right. But consider this carefully. The absence of visible activity is not the same as the absence of progress. Some of the most important processes in life are by design invisible. When a seed is placed into the ground, there's no dramatic announcement, no visible celebration of growth. From the outside, it looks like nothing is happening, just soil, just stillness, just waiting. Yet beneath the surface, there is an extraordinary transformation underway. The seed is breaking open, roots are forming, structures are being built to support something that does not yet exist above ground. If you judge the process only by what you could see, you would call it failure. If you understood the nature of growth, you would call it preparation. Silence works the same way in human experience. There are seasons when everything appears motionless, when your efforts seem to vanish without effect, when your progress feels suspended. And it is precisely in those seasons that the most critical developments often occur, internally, subtly, beyond the reach of immediate perception. Strength is being assembled. Perspective is being expanded. But because none of it arrives with noise, you mistake quiet for stagnation. You see, we've been conditioned to associate progress with visibility. We expect success to look like constant motion, constant confirmation, constant reinforcement. We want signs that reassure us, signals that tell us we are moving in the right direction. And when those signals disappear, panic quietly enters the conversation. Yet life does not operate solely through spectacle. There are chapters written in whispers. There are victories constructed in stillness. There are turning points that announce themselves only after they have already begun. The danger lies not in the silence itself, but in how we interpret it. Silence is neutral. It carries no inherent meaning. It is the mind that labels it as rejection, as delay, as failure, as abandonment. And once that label is accepted, behavior begins to change. Energy weakens, confidence erodes, commitment becomes fragile, all because nothing seemed to be happening. But what if the silence is not an empty space, but a necessary one? What if it is not a pause in your story, but a hidden chapter? What if the stillness you fear is actually alignment you cannot yet detect? Think about the moments in your life that shaped you the most. Rarely were they loud, easy, and instantly rewarding. More often, they were confusing, uncertain, even discouraging at the time. Only later did their purpose become clear. Only later did you recognize that what felt like inactivity was actually redirection, reinforcement. Silence is not always a wall. Sometimes it is a workshop. It is where patience is tested, where motives are purified, where resilience is strengthened. It is where you learn whether your persistence depends on external validation or internal conviction. It is where your belief either collapses from lack of noise or deepens from understanding. And that distinction matters because anyone can move forward when progress is obvious. Anyone can stay motivated when rewards are immediate. Anyone can believe when evidence is abundant. But to remain steady when everything is quiet, that reveals something rare, something that cannot be manufactured through comfort or convenience. So if you find yourself in a silent season, resist the urge to assume the worst. Resist the temptation to interpret stillness as defeat. Resist the quiet voice that insists nothing is happening simply because nothing is visible. Impatience is a quiet force, but do not underestimate it. It doesn't kick the door down. It doesn't make a scene. It slips into your thinking with a tone that sounds almost reasonable, almost protected, almost wise. It tells you you've waited long enough. It tells you you've done enough. It tells you that if the results haven't shown up by now, perhaps they never will. And the most dangerous part, it often sounds like your own voice. Impatience rarely announces itself as weakness. It disguises itself as logic. It wraps itself in phrases like being realistic or knowing when to move on. It convinces you that stepping away is maturity, that lowering your expectations is intelligence, that abandoning the process is simply a practical decision. But impatience is not always rooted in wisdom. Often it is rooted in discomfort. We live in a world obsessed with immediacy. Everything is fast, instant, on demand. Information arrives in seconds. Responses appear immediately. Entertainment is available without delay, and slowly, suddenly, this rhythm conditions the mind. We begin to expect life itself to operate at the speed of convenience.
We expect effort to produce instant outcomes.
We expect persistence to generate immediate rewards. We expect progress to be visible right now. So when life moves at its own pace, when growth unfolds gradually, when change develops invisibly, when outcomes take longer than our preferences, frustration emerges, not because anything is wrong, but because reality refuses to obey our timelines. Impatience feeds on that friction. It whispers that waiting is weakness. It insists that delay is evidence of failure. It frames endurance as foolishness. And if you listen long enough, you begin to measure your journey not by direction, not by growth, not by purpose, but by speed. You begin to believe that if something meaningful hasn't happened quickly, it cannot be meaningful at all. But consider how deeply flawed that idea is. Anything of real substance takes time. Strength takes time. Mastery takes time. Transformation takes time. The most enduring structures in life, whether skills, character, relationships, or achievements, are rarely built overnight. They are formed through repetition, refinement, adjustment, persistence, yet impatience has no tolerance for invisible progress. It demands signs. It demands reassurance. And when those demands are not met, discouragement grows louder. You begin to question the process. You begin to doubt the path. You begin to wonder whether the absence of immediate reward means the absence of eventual success. This is where many people quietly sabotage their own progress, not because they lack ability, not because they lack opportunity, but because they lack patience. They walk away too early. They abandon effort still taking shape. They misinterpret temporary stillness as permanent defeat. They forget that timing is not always an obstacle. Sometimes it is a requirement. Think about it. If every desire materialized instantly, what would be developed in you? Where would resilience come from? Where would discipline be formed? Where would perspective be strengthened? The very delays you resist often carry the lessons you need to sustain what you are asking for. Impatience sees only the waiting. Wisdom sees the preparation within the waiting. Impatience says nothing is happening. Understanding says something is forming because growth is rarely synchronized with your comfort. Progress does not always unfold at the speed of your expectations. There are phases where the work is internal, where foundations are being laid, where adjustments are occurring beyond your awareness. And impatience, unable to detect those invisible movements, declares the entire process defective. But impatience has ended more journeys than failure ever has. Failure can be survived, obstacle, lays can be navigated, setbacks can be corrected. But when impatience convinces you to quit, the story ends by your own decision. The possibility disappears, not because it was unreachable, but because it was abandoned. Patience is not passive. Patience is endurance with clarity. It is the ability to continue without constant validation. It is the discipline to remain steady when results are not immediate. It is the recognition that meaningful progress often operates beyond the limits of your current perception. And make no mistake, impatience will visit everyone. No one is immune. The question is not whether impatience will speak, but whether you will treat it as truth. There is a kind of progress that makes no sound, no spotlight, no celebration, no visible markers that the world can applaud. It is the progress that happens beneath the surface in places no one else can observe, in ways even you may fail to recognize while it is unfolding. And because it is invisible, it is often underestimated, dismissed, or worse, mistaken for stagnation. We are conditioned to respect what we can see. Visible movement reassures us. Tangible results validate us. External change convinces us that effort is paying off. But life does not restrict its most important work to what is immediately observable. Some of the most decisive transformations occur quietly, internally, gradually, long before they produce anything the outside world can measure. Consider how much of your own development has happened in ways no one else could witness. The strengthening of your patience after enduring difficulty, the sharpening of your judgment after making mistakes, the thickening of your resilience after surviving disappointment. None of these shifts arrive with dramatic announcements, yet they fundamentally alter who you are and what you are capable of handling. Invisible preparation is not inactivity, it is construction. While you worry about visible advancement, something deeper may be taking place. Your perspective may be expanding, your endurance may be solidifying, your emotional discipline may be strengthening. These are not small adjustments, these are structural reinforcements, the kind that determine whether success, when it arrives, can be sustained rather than squandered. Yet invisible growth presents a challenge to the impatient mind, because when effort does not immediately translate into visible reward, frustration begins to build. You start to believe nothing is changing. You start to question whether your actions matter. You start to compare your behind the scenes process with someone else's highlight reel. And without realizing it, you devalue the very progress that is quietly preparing you for greater responsibility. But imagine receiving everything you desire before developing the capacity to manage it. Imagine stepping into opportunity without the maturity to navigate it. Imagine achieving visible success without the internal stability to sustain it. What appears as delay is often protection. What feels like slowness is often calibration. Preparation is rarely glamorous. Growth is rarely loud. The most important upgrades in a person's life often occur internally. Shifts in mindset, discipline, awareness, emotional control. These are the changes that do not attract attention, but determine everything that follows. Because external success without internal readiness is fragile. It collapses under adversity. It disappears when circumstances shift. Invisible preparation builds durability. It ensures that when doors open, you can walk through them with steadiness rather than panic. It ensures that when challenges arise, you respond with strength rather than fear. It ensures that when recognition comes, you possess the grounding not to be destabilized by it. But invisibility makes this process difficult to appreciate. When you cannot point to immediate results, the mind becomes restless. It seeks reassurance. It demands proof. It grows uneasy with the idea that meaningful progress might be occurring beyond the limits of perception. And so you begin to judge your journey unfairly, evaluating it solely by what is visible rather than by what is forming. Not all movement is obvious. Not all advancement is dramatic. Not all progress announces itself. Sometimes you are being strengthened rather than elevated. Sometimes you are being refined rather than rewarded. Sometimes you are being prepared rather than promoted. And preparation is never wasted. Every difficult season you endure, every quiet struggle you survive, every unseen effort you persist through contributes to something larger than immediate recognition. It shapes your judgment. It expands your understanding. It builds a version of you capable of carrying what you once could not. Trust that unseen work. Respect the silent construction. Recognize that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Doubt has a peculiar way of entering your life. It doesn't always crash in like a storm. More often, it seeps in quietly, subtly, almost politely. It waits for silence. It waits for fatigue. It waits for those moments when you are already tired, already uncertain, already questioning. And then it begins to speak, not with facts, but with feelings, not with certainty, but with suggestion. Doubt is persuasive because it sounds intimate. It sounds like your own reasoning, your own logic, your own cautious voice trying to protect you from disappointment. It tells you to be careful, to temper your expectations, to prepare for the possibility that things may not work out. And the more exhausted you become, the more convincing it appears. Especially in quiet season, when everything around you grows still, when progress is not obvious, when reinforcement is absent, the mind becomes a fertile ground for doubt. In the absence of external confirmation, internal insecurities grow louder. You begin to replay failures, magnify setbacks, reinterpret delays as verdicts. What was once patience starts feeling like futility. What was once effort starts feeling like waste. And doubt thrives in that distortion because doubt does not need proof. It only needs your attention. It feeds on uncertainty, amplifies fear, and gradually reframes your perception. Small obstacles begin to feel like insurmountable barriers. Here, temporary challenges begin to feel permanent. The path that once inspired you begins to look questionable, fragile, unrealistic. Nothing external may have changed, yet your interpretation of everything begins to shift. That is the true power of doubt. It alters meaning without altering reality. It convinces you that your situation has deteriorated when in truth, only your perspective has. It transforms neutral events into negative evidence. Silence becomes rejection. Delay becomes failure. Difficulty becomes impossibility. And once these interpretations take hold, your energy begins to respond accordingly. Confidence weakens, motivation declines, action slows, all because doubt presented a story and you accepted it as truth. But doubt is not an authority. It is a voice shaped by fear, memory, insecurity, and imagination. A voice that often speaks with conviction, but rarely with accuracy. Doubt predicts outcomes it cannot see, declares endings it cannot know, and assigns meaning to events it does not fully understand. Yet many people treat doubt as a reliable narrator. They obey its warnings without questioning its credibility. They shrink their ambitions to silence its noise. They abandoned paths not because the paths were wrong, but because doubt made continuation emotionally uncomfortable. Understand this clearly. Doubt feels convincing, but feeling convinced is not the same as being correct. Every meaningful pursuit triggers doubt at some stage. Every significant goal encounters resistance, ambiguity, delay. And in those moments, doubt will inevitably present itself as a rational response. It will argue that retreat is safety, that hesitation is wisdom, that surrender is realism. But doubt's primary function is not guidance, it is protection from discomfort. Growth is uncomfortable. Uncertainty is uncomfortable. Waiting is uncomfortable. Effort without immediate reward is uncomfortable. And doubt offers relief, immediate seductive relief, by suggesting you step away from the very conditions required for progress. It promises emotional safety at the cost of possibility. It reduces short-term anxiety while silently expanding long-term regret, because doubt never shows you the full picture. It does not show you what persistence might produce. It does not show you how close you may be to change. It does not show you the consequences of premature surrender. It only shows you the discomfort of now. The discipline, then, is not to eliminate doubt. That is impossible, but to refuse its authority, to recognize its presence without accepting its conclusions. To understand that doubt can speak without being obeyed, can exist without being believed, can appear without dictating your decisions. Courage is not the absence of doubt. Courage is movement despite doubt. Strength is not never questioning. The strength is refusing to let questioning become quitting. Because doubt is loudest precisely when clarity is lowest. It is most convincing when you are most tired. And if you interpret that noise as truth, you risk abandoning progress that was still unfolding beyond your perception. So when doubt begins its familiar monologue, pause, observe it, challenge it. Ask whether it offers evidence or merely emotion. Ask whether it predicts reality or merely projects fear. Ask whether it protects your growth or protects your comfort. There comes a moment in every meaningful journey when the applause fades, the encouragement quiets, the external validation that once fueled your energy becomes scarce, sometimes disappearing altogether, and suddenly you are left alone with your effort. No spotlight, no recognition, no reassuring signs that anyone notices the work you continue to pour your heart into. This is where many people begin to slow down, not because they lack ability, not because they lack vision, but because the human spirit, when untrained, becomes dependent on acknowledgement. We all enjoy being seen. There is nothing wrong with that. Appreciation feels good. Praise feels motivating. Recognition feels like confirmation that our struggle carries value. But when your commitment relies entirely on external reinforcement, you place your persistence at the mercy of circumstances you cannot control. And circumstances change, support fluctuates, attention shifts, praise moves elsewhere. If your drive is built on applause, silence will weaken you. If your discipline depends on approval, absence will shake you. Because now the work demands something deeper, something far more durable than excitement or recognition. It demands identity. There is a profound difference between doing something because it feels rewarding and doing something because it reflects who you are. When effort is tied to emotion, consistency becomes fragile. When effort is tied to identity, persistence becomes nature. When you no longer ask, am I being noticed, but instead declare, this is what I do, a shift occurs. The presence or absence of applause loses its power. The noise of the outside world becomes secondary. The work itself becomes the anchor. But this transformation is not easy. Working without recognition challenges the ego. It tests motivation. It exposes hidden dependencies. You begin to realize how much of your energy was borrowed from external reactions rather than generated from internal conviction. And without those reactions, continuing forward requires a different kind of strength, quieter, steadier, more self-sustaining, because now no one is clapping, no one is cheering, no one is confirming you are on the right path. Yet, the effort must continue. This is the territory where true discipline is formed, where purpose is purified, where you discover whether your commitment is conditional or absolute. Anyone can push forward when encouragement is abundant. Anyone can stay inspired when progress is celebrated. But to remain consistent when your work feels invisible, that reveals ownership. Ownership says, I do not need to be watched to remain committed. Ownership says, I do not require applause to maintain excellence. Ownership says, my standards are not controlled by attention. Your performance rises and falls with the moods of the environment. But when your actions are governed by principle, consistency becomes independent of noise. You continue not because you are praised, but because lowering your effort would violate who you have decided to be. And that decision is powerful. Silence then stops being a threat and starts becoming a test of self-leadership, a test of whether your work is truly yours or merely a response to observation. Without applause, you confront the purest version of commitment, effort sustained by belief rather than reaction. Understand this clearly. Some of the most important phases of your growth will occur when no one is paying attention. No audience, no validation, no immediate reward, just you and the work. And if you learn to thrive in that space, if you learn to execute with excellence when recognition is absent, you develop a form of strength that cannot be easily shaken. Because now your consistency is not rented from the outside world, it is owned from within. Applause is pleasant but unreliable. Attention is encouraging but temporary. Identity is steady but requires choice. So choose carefully what sustains you. Choose whether you move forward only when observed, or whether you move forward because it is embedded in your character. Choose whether silence weakens your effort or sharpens your resolve. Trust is a word people use easily, but living it is something entirely different. It sounds simple when circumstances are favorable, when progress is visible, when life unfolds according to expectation. In those moments, trust feels natural, almost effortless, but trust reveals its true weight. When clarity disappears, when outcomes are uncertain, when the path ahead offers more questions than answers. Because trusting when everything makes sense is not difficult. Trusting when nothing seems to make sense, that is the challenge. There will be seasons when you cannot see the full picture, when your efforts seem disconnected from results, when your direction feels uncertain, and the instinctive reaction in those moments is control. The mind wants guarantees. It wants reassurance. It wants evidence that things are moving exactly as planned. But life rarely provides that luxury. Much of existence unfolds beyond immediate understanding. Connections form invisibly, timing aligns quietly. Obstacles dissolve without announcement, yet because you cannot observe these movements directly, discomfort arises, doubt emerges. Anxiety begins to whisper that uncertainty itself is a problem to be solved rather than a condition to be navigated. This is where trust becomes essential. Trust is not passive optimism. It is not blind hope. It is the stabilizing force that allows you to continue acting without complete visibility. It is the refusal to interpret temporary ambiguity as permanent failure. It is the decision to remain steady when emotional impulses demand panic. Without trust, uncertainty feels paralyzing. With trust, uncertainty becomes tolerable. Understand what trust truly does. It does not eliminate difficulty. It does not guarantee immediate success. It does not remove obstacles from your path. What it does is regulate your response. It prevents your mind from collapsing under the weight of incomplete information. It allows you to move forward without requiring constant confirmation. Because the need for constant confirmation is exhausting. If every step requires visible proof, progress becomes fragile. If every delay triggers fear, endurance becomes impossible. If every unknown breeds hesitation, momentum dissolves. Trust interrupts that cycle. It anchors you in the recognition that not everything must be understood immediately to be working effectively.
Consider how much of life operates without your direct supervision. Your body heals without instruction.
Your mind processes experiences without conscious effort. Complex systems function continuously beyond your awareness, yet you do not question their operation simply because you cannot observe every mechanism. Why then demand total visibility from your journey? Uncertainty is not evidence of misdirection. Silence is not evidence of abandonment. Delay is not evidence of defeat. But without trust, the mind rushes to these conclusions. It fills gaps in knowledge with worst case interpretations. It confuses lack of information with negative outcomes. And slowly you begin reacting not to reality, but to imagined scenarios constructed by fear. Trust restores proportion. It reminds you that incomplete visibility is a normal feature of growth, not a signal of collapse. It allows patience to coexist with effort. It prevents emotional turbulence from dictating irreversible decisions. It creates psychological stability in environments where guarantees do not exist. And stability matters more than certainty. Certainty is a choice. When you trust, you conserve energy otherwise wasted on anxiety. You free your mind from constant second guessing. You prevent temporary discomfort from triggering permanent retreat. Trust does not promise that everything will unfold easily, but it ensures that difficulty does not automatically translate into despair. Trust says, I will continue despite not knowing everything. Trust says, I will not mistake silence for failure. Trust says, I will allow time to reveal what pressure cannot force. Because many outcomes cannot be rushed. Many processes cannot be fully seen. Many developments cannot be predicted on demand. Trust acknowledges this reality without surrendering initiative. It allows you to act with discipline while accepting that results may operate on timelines beyond immediate preference. This is not weakness. This is maturity. Anyone can believe when evidence is obvious. Anyone can remain confident when success is immediate, but to maintain composure when visibility is low, that reflects inner strength. That reflects a mind no longer enslaved by the need for constant reassurance. So when uncertainty appears, resist the urge to panic. When silence stretches, resist the impulse to assume the worst. When progress feels slow, resist the temptation to declare defeat prematurely. There's a deceptive moment that appears in nearly every difficult journey, a moment so convincing that many people accept it without question. It is the moment when exhaustion peaks, when progress feels non-existent, when the weight of effort begins to feel heavier than the promise of outcome. It is the point where your mind quietly concludes, this is it. This is the end. Nothing is changing. But that conclusion is often an illusion. What feels like a breaking point is not always a signal that you have reached your limit. More often, it is a collision between expectation and timing, between your desire for visible change and reality's refusal to move on command. The discomfort is real, the fatigue is real, the frustration is real, but the interpretation that nothing is working is frequently a distortion born from emotional overload, because the mind under prolonged strain loses perspective. When you have invested time, energy, patience, and still cannot see clear results, your internal dialogue begins to shift. Small setbacks feel catastrophic. Temporary obstacles feel permanent. Delays feel like verdicts rather than phases. The journey that once inspired you begins to look like evidence of miscalculation. And slowly, quietly, quitting starts to feel reasonable. Not dramatic, not impulsive, justified. You tell yourself you are being practical, protecting your energy, avoiding further disappointment. You convince yourself that stepping away is wisdom rather than surrender. But what you rarely realize in that moment is how profoundly unreliable perception becomes at the height of fatigue. Exhaustion alters judgment. Frustration distorts reality. The emotional strain magnifies negativity. When you are tired, truly tired, everything appears heavier than it actually is. Challenges seem larger, progress seems smaller, possibilities seem fewer. The mind stops evaluating objectively and starts reacting defensively. It seeks relief, not accuracy, escape, not understanding. And this is precisely why the breaking point is so dangerous. Because it feels final, it feels conclusive, it feels like a clear assessment of reality. Yet history, both personal and universal, repeatedly reveals something remarkable. Many breakthroughs occur not when confidence is highest, but when endurance is most difficult. Many turning points emerge immediately after periods that felt indistinguishable from failure. Many transformations begin at moments that felt like absolute collapse. But no one recognizes this while standing inside the discomfort. In the middle of struggle, you see only strain. In the middle of fatigue, you see only depletion. You cannot yet see the proximity of change, the invisible adjustments underway, the quiet alignments forming beyond perception. And so the mind, desperate for clarity, manufactures a conclusion. This is pointless. But feelings are not always facts. Intensity is not always accuracy. Discomfort is not always defeat. The breaking point illusion convinces you that because relief is absent, progress must be absent. That because results are invisible, results must be non-existent. That because the journey feels unbearable, continuation must be futile. Yet feelings measure experience, not reality. There is a critical distinction between being at the end of your strength and being at the edge of transformation. They feel similar. Both involve discomfort. Both involve doubt. Both involve the powerful urge to stop. But one represents genuine depletion, while the other represents resistance preceding change. And from within the moment, they are nearly impossible to differentiate. This is why persistence requires something stronger than emotion. If you rely solely on how the journey feels, you will retreat at the very moments that demand endurance. If you interpret fatigue as proof of futility, you will abandon efforts still approaching their turning point, because growth often intensifies pressure before release. Progress often feels slowest before acceleration. Change often hides longest before revealing itself. The breaking point is not always a wall. Sometimes it is a threshold disguised as one. So when you feel that familiar exhaustion, when your mind begins presenting surrender as logic, pause before accepting its verdict. Recognize the distortion that fatigue can create. Understand that your perception in that state is influenced by emotion rather than full visibility. Hold your ground a little longer, not blindly, but consciously, not stubbornly, but wisely, because many people have walked away at the precise moment when continuation would have changed everything. If you have ever pushed past a moment that felt like the end and later realized it was not, type "I will push through" below.